In northern Nigeria, you don't have to look hard to find rumors. A voice note about bandits, a screenshot of an official government announcement, a video that claims to show a massacre, but was filmed years ago, somewhere else. Now, into this chaos, something new has arrived. An 18-month project funded by the European Union, launched with fanfare in Sokoto. Workshops for journalists, training for teachers, campus clubs to teach media literacy, community campaigns to fight disinformation and strengthen democracy. On the surface, it looks harmless, even helpful. Who wouldn't want less fake news? Fewer deadly rumors? But look closer. These are the same powers that drew African borders with a ruler, that censored African voices in colonial newspapers, that jailed African nationalists for seditious speech. Today they no longer rule our land, but they are quietly moving to rule something far more intimate. What we are allowed to believe. This is not just a story about fact checks and workshops. This is a story about a new colonization, an invisible empire built not with soldiers and flags, but with algorithms, policy papers, and training manuals on how Africans should think correctly. Sokoto, a historic center of learning, a front line in Nigeria's current insecurity, and now a laboratory for Europe's latest experiment in Africa. The project has a carefully crafted name, Countering Disinformation and Empowering Democracy in Northwestern Nigeria. It targets 5 states, Sokoto, Zamfara, Katsina, Kebbi, and Niger, regions weighed down by poverty, violence, and a flood of unverified information. Inside a training room, under fluorescent lights and PowerPoint slides, Nigerian journalists listen as experts explain how to identify harmful content. Teachers are taught to integrate media literacy into their lessons. Community leaders are told how to correct rumors and guide their people towards verified sources. Every piece sounds reasonable on its own, but step back and a pattern emerges. From the newsroom to the classroom to the village meeting, one foreign bloc is funding the mental infrastructure of an entire region. If you wanted to influence how millions of Africans understand politics, elections, security, even their own government, this is exactly how you would do it. You wouldn't barge in and seize television stations. You would arrive politely, with grants, and workshops, and offer to help Africans fix their information problems. The official enemy here is disinformation, dangerous rumors, fake election results, fabricated videos that inflame tensions. These threats are real. People have died because of false messages forwarded on a smartphone. But listen carefully to the language. Disinformation is not a natural phenomenon like rain. It is a label. Someone decides what it applies to. Is a rumor about a bandit attack disinformation? Yes, if it is false. But what about a viral thread accusing the government of colluding with warlords? What about criticism of European policy in the Sahel? What about calls for canceling unfair debts? When the European Union pays for the workshops, funds the tools, and sets the frameworks, it quietly gains influence over that line between legitimate criticism and dangerous propaganda. Once upon a time, colonial officers decided which African newspapers were responsible and which were seditious. In 2026, the language has changed, but the logic has not. Instead of sedition, we hear harmful speech. Instead of civilizing the natives, we hear building democratic resilience. But at the core is the same idea. Africans cannot be trusted to manage their own minds without supervision from Europe. To understand Sokoto, we have to leave Sokoto. We have to travel to Brussels. For years, European officials have been obsessed with one thing: information control. They have adopted action plans on disinformation, democracy strategies, and voluntary codes of practice that tell global platforms how to deal with content. Their stated fear is foreign interference, especially from Russia and China. But there is a second layer. Once Europe writes these rules for itself, it begins exporting them. Under the banner of fighting foreign information manipulation and interference, the EU funds campaigns in West Africa, hosts conferences, and trains journalists across the region. African countries are cast as vulnerable battlegrounds, where great powers fight for hearts and minds. And whose standard becomes the default? Not African standards, not ECOWAS standards, not AU standards, European standards. This is how empires look in the 21st century. They do not always occupy territory. They occupy definitions. They occupy categories like truth, propaganda, reliable source. Sokoto is not an isolated charity project. It is one front in a much larger campaign to make Europe, the global referee of what counts as reality. Now flip the picture. Can you imagine the African Union funding a program in Paris to strengthen media literacy among French journalists? Can you imagine Nigeria launching an 18-month project in Berlin to protect German democracy from disinformation about Africa? It sounds absurd, because the power runs only one way. Under classical colonialism, European powers governed African subjects, but were never governed in return. Under information colonialism, European powers shape African public discourse, but never accept African institutions shaping theirs. Europeans enter our information space as teachers, funders, referees. We do not enter theirs at all. That asymmetry is not an accident. It is the basic structure of an empire. So when you hear the phrase, EU launches project to counter disinformation in Nigeria, remember what sits behind those gentle words. A former colonial bloc defining the problem, financing the solution, and positioning itself as guardian of African democracy. Yes, there are real dangers in rumors and fake news. Yes, local journalists and activists sometimes use these funds to fight genuine injustice. But the deeper question remains, who owns the space in our heads? If Europe can shape how millions of Africans decide what is true and what is false, then Europe does not need to occupy our land. It already occupies our minds. In episode 2, we ask a simple question with dangerous answers. Why is Europe so eager to police what Africans think? While no African institution polices the lies Europe tells about Africa,